Welcome. You are listening to In the Trenches. I am Garrett Schwartz. With me, as always, is Jeffrey Dubrov. It is Monday evening, and boy, oh boy, do we got a special show because last week was a special game. The University of Southern California Trojans giving a beatdown to the Stanford Cardinals, previously the number 13 team in the country, sliding down in the rankings. USC jumping up from number 6 to number 4 in the AP poll, and what a game. Jeffrey, you and I were talking before the show and saying this could have been the best USC football game that you and I have seen during our student careers. Me personally, I think it was the most dominant two-way football game the USC Trojans have played in my 4 years at USC. Sam Darnold pulling in a remarkable, efficient performance, 21 of 26. Most impressive of all for the offense, the backfield, Stephen Carr and Ronald Jones, and of course, the defense absolutely dominating the Cardinals, containing the Cardinals to only 25 rushing yards in the second half. But Jeffrey, I digress. Let's talk about the game. Let's start. Is this the best USC football game you've seen in the post-Pete Carroll era?
I'm going to go with the Washington USC game last year in Seattle. That, to me, was the best all-around football game I've seen. And that's not to take away anything from this, what we saw this past Saturday. That was an absolute statement win at its finest. Let's go away from the fact that USC was favored in this game by the Vegas betting books. No one picked this team to win. The ESPN FPI poll didn't have this team winning. Kirk Herbstreit and the Game Day crew did not have this team winning. Heck, a lot of Bleacher Report and CBS writers did not have this team winning this game. They came out and they beat Stanford at their own game. They controlled the line of scrimmage. The offensive line was incredible. Sam Darnold looked at it like his normal self, and I think we might have what people are now saying, the best backfield in the entire country was Stephen Carr and my boy Ronald Jones, the Texas Tesla. That was an unbelievable game. I mean, there's a quote from David Shaw. They ran it better than we did tonight, and I'm not used to saying things like that. Garrett, when you look back, and I watched the film last night, there's an hour clip on YouTube. What impressed you the most? What was the biggest concern heading into this game for you that kind of were washed away once the game was over?
So from week 1 to week 2, clearly just a better football team we saw. And I'm going to pinpoint this to the wide receiver core. And also just, I'll make it in general, the passing game for the Trojans. Sam Darnold was good in week 1. He was great in week 2. He did throw for 2 interceptions, but like we said, 21 for 26 efficient. After the week 1 win against Western Michigan, Sam Darnold admitted that something just felt off. He couldn't really pinpoint what it was, but something just didn't seem right. And I think that what that was is that he wasn't in sync with his wide receivers. Week 2, we saw him connecting with his guys. Obviously, Deontay Burnett, another big game, averaging 142 yards since the Rose Bowl last season. And, Stephen Mitchell really stepped it up this game. Remember, coming back after his second knee surgery, really reasserting himself into the Trojans' offense. Jeff?
I'll be one to say it as well. I was one of the people who was doubting Stephen Mitchell, not because of his talent. I mean, he's a talented receiver. He's a scholarship athlete at the University of Southern California. He's a good football player, but it's always hard coming back from an ACL injury like that. He was absolutely unbelievable. And Deontay Burnett, a guy that people said at the beginning of the year can't be as dominant as Juju Smith. He's not a number 1 receiver. Boy, did he look like it the other night. 9 receptions, 121 yards, 2 touchdowns. But going on the other side of the ball, I was very impressed with the defense. They gave up that 75-yard touchdown run to Bryce Love early in the game, but settled in after that, only letting up 342 yards. This Stanford team couldn't move the ball. If they didn't get positive yards on their first few plays, they weren't going anywhere. It was unbelievable. Kellen Christ had a couple of good throws here and there, but I'll say this, Jack Jones didn't look spectacular in the pass defense, but that again
definitely improved.
But you have to remember, this is a Stanford team that's playing 4 tight ends at all times, 2 of which are slotted on the outside. But man, was he great in the run game. Like I said, I watched some of it last night. He looked fantastic. This team really, really impressed me. I didn't think we were going to lose that game, but I didn't think it would be as dominant as it was on Saturday night. I was blown away.
All right, now, Jeff. We said the theme of week one was don't overreact. So we come out week two, and you and I could not be more USC championship bound, right? I mean, the Trojans just looked absolutely spectacular. But I want to propose something to you. USC looked great, don't get me wrong, but is it possible that this Stanford team is a little bit overrated? You mentioned the Stanford week one matchup against Rice.
You mentioned it last
cupcake,
week.
Right? You mentioned that. But talk about Stanford last season, a team that ranked 9th of 12 in the Pac-12 in scoring offense. You remove Christian McCaffrey from that team, and suddenly you have a Stanford team that just can't move the ball. So we look great, but I think this Stanford team might not be as good as we anticipated.
You're also talking about a team that's playing in a conference with some of the most high-powered offenses in the country. You look at Washington with Jake Browning, they're going to put up a lot of points. Washington State with Luke Falk and head coach Mike Leach, they're going to put up a lot of points. Even Cal last year with Davis Webb was able to put up a lot of points. I don't think that's a degrading stat for Stanford. Stanford's never been an offense that's going to put up 56 points in a game. They are methodical. They beat you with discipline, hard-nosed.
But 25 rushing yards in the second half.
And that's a credit, I think, to USC. That's a credit to USC's defense. Uchenna Nwosu played absolutely spectacular on Saturday night.
So, Jeff, we are actually going to go to break now because we got a very special guest calling in just a minute. Max Meyer, homepage producer for Sports Illustrated. He wrote a really interesting column on Stephen Carr and Ronald Jones and what their workload might look like. So we're going to go to break. You are listening to In the Trenches. I'm Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeffrey Dubrov, Max Meyer from Sports Illustrated. When we're back.
We are back on the phone with us, Sports Illustrated homepage producer Max Meyer. Max, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Not much, guys. Just enjoying a little Monday Night Football, but can always use college football as a breather in between games.
That's what I like to hear. I'll come out and ask right away. You wrote an excellent column for Sports Illustrated talking about if USC has the best backfield in college football. So I'll ask you, from what you've seen through the first two games, does USC have the best backfield in college football?
So before the season, I would have said Georgia with Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb would definitely have those honors. But I've just been really, really impressed with Ronald Jones as the lead horse, and then Stephen Carr just elevating his way up the depth chart from fourth to second. And, I mean, Carr is just like a very special talent. Jones could be the Heisman guy who gets, notoriety from this team. So I just think that they are a very potent 1-2 punch, and they're lightning and lightning. No other way to describe it.
Lightning and lightning. This is Garrett, by the way. Thanks so much for joining us, Max. While you both mentioned Carr and Jones are explosive backs, how do you feel they complement each other well in the backfield?
Well, I just think that it's rare to have one running back who's like a hold-your-breath kind of back who can, bust out a big gain on any play, and USC has two. And not only do they have home run capability, which I'm sure the fans have seen over the first two games, but they also have shown that they can, grind it in between the tackles. And the fact that, they can sub one in while the other takes a breather, I think that's a big advantage. So that way you don't have to work one of the backs too hard throughout the game, so that way they're not tired in the fourth. But I think they just keep each other fresh, and they both have unique styles that opposing defenses have to worry about when preparing for USC.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Stephen Carr, I don't think I've seen him get legitimately tackled in the backfield. It looks like he's always getting tripped up, which ends his run. The question I have is, you're looking at two running backs, and Stephen Carr is already making a name for himself nationally. But Rojo, in my opinion, and Garrett and I were talking about this, seemingly needs to be the guy, the main running back they're going to use. He's waited his turn. He's good enough to carry that load. But should Stephen Carr get a bigger workload? Should he see more carries?
So So I think Carr should, but I wouldn't necessarily take away from Ronald Jones's production because I think you're right. I mean, Jones has established that he can be the workhorse from this team. But I just think, I mean, as talented as Sam Darnold is, I think the identity of this team is a running team. So I think really they should be sacrificing some of their passing plays to be a run-first team and then have the run open up play action to really, revitalize the passing offense, which I think has definitely had its ups and downs against Western Michigan. But I think by going run first and then just really like forcing it down the opponent's throats, it'll really open things up for the rest of the offense.
You bring up the rush first offense. T. Martin coming out with 6 running plays for Ronald Jones in the first 7 for the Trojans. So the play calling was definitely something that changed from week 1 to week 2 for USC. But Max, is there anything out that really stood out? What really improved from the Trojans from week 1 against Western Michigan to week 2 against Stanford? Because in my opinion, it just looked like a totally different football team.
Sure. So like you said, USC set the tone immediately against Stanford by running 6 out of 7 plays. In the first game against Western Michigan, Jones had 3 carries for 53 yards on the first drive, and then USC running backs had 2 carries on the following 3 drives. So it didn't really show like a good bounce or good play calling by T. Martin, but just the fact that it showed like more of a balanced offense, I think, was a big plus. Also, one of the big question marks for USC was who would emerge as the second wide receiver, because I think Deontay Burnett has shown so far that he can definitely make the leap as the true number 1 option.
Yep.
But Stephen Mitchell was great in the second game. I mean, he had 2 touchdowns and I think over 90 receiving yards. So if USC has a second threat that can shift some of the attention away from Burnett, I mean, he's still going to be obviously the guy that the secondary is focused on down the field. But if USC can have another guy that can develop chemistry or rapport with Sam Darnold, that would really boost the offense, because in the first game, I mean, the passing game was really haunted by drops. And Mitchell, he looked good. And you know what? He's been unlucky with injuries, but I think he can definitely emerge as that second option.
And what I really enjoyed seeing last Saturday that we didn't see in week 1 was there was a much larger rotation of receivers. You saw Velus Jones play some minutes. You saw Jody Lewis play some minutes, and not necessarily making catches or getting yards, but it was nice to see fresh legs out there, especially with such a depth and a wealth of talent at receiver. I mean, you're looking at players that are fast, they're talented, they're big. Joseph Lewis, Clay Helton keeps on saying, is a Juju Smith-Schuster type, but maybe even faster. That's something that stood out to me. I really, really enjoyed seeing this rotation. You're absolutely right. Stephen Mitchell was fantastic, and a lot of credit to him bouncing back from an injury that is haunting for football players.
Yep, and I would also I agree with you in that USC does have an exciting stable of young receivers. I mean, you mentioned you said Joseph Lewis, Velus Jones. Michael Pittman's nursing an injury, but he's another big body on the outside that I think can definitely contribute.
Absolutely.
And I think if USC wants to make the leap to the playoff, they're going to need one of those young wide receivers to be a starter and a dependable guy down the field.
Yeah, I love to see Tyler Vaughns get involved as well. So the passing game, a big point of emphasis for improvement from week 1 to week 2. You mentioned in your column, however, despite USC's win against Stanford, still some causes for concern. In my opinion, Jeff and I have talked a lot about the special teams and how it went from last season with Adoree Jackson to one of the strengths for this Trojans team to a point of weakness. Another thing you mentioned in your column is some issues with the coaching staff. I'm just curious, would you mind elaborate on what you think those issues with the coaching staff are, and if you think they'll be addressed over the season?
Sure. So I think the chief one is inexperience. And, I mean, Martin and Helton, I mean, they're still in their second full year as offensive coordinator and head coach, respectively. So in the first game, I think Martin, I don't think he called that great of a game, but, he's still really learning on the job. So I think inexperience for him in terms of play calling, like there are some times where he's too pass-heavy, in my opinion, but I think that it'll, come along once he still settles in his job since it's only a second year. And then same with Helton, although both of them admittedly were great against Stanford. But Helton last season definitely had some curious decisions, most notably to punt in opponent's territory or near midfield. And I would just like to see them improve upon that and really like be challenged in a game, in a close game, just to see what kind of decision making plays out. Because in the Pac-12, I mean, the other top team is Washington with Chris Peterson, who's one of the best coaches in the country. So, and he has a lot of experience. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because inexperience, I think, is just still such a key factor with the coaching staff.
So you mentioned Team Martin. You mentioned how USC probably is still a little bit too pass heavy. So if USC does transition to a more rush first offense, does this seemingly eliminate Sam Darnold from the Heisman race? Should it matter? Is a title the only thing that really matters for this Trojans team? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I absolutely. I think it should be team first, title first. I don't think individual stats should be that much of a factor. And Darnold is definitely still talented enough to get some numbers, but I just think that's a big advantage USC has is the running back rotation. And it's not Darnold's fault. I mean, obviously he's still really talented, but they lost two big dependable receivers in Juju Smith-Schuster and Darius Rogers going to the NFL. And the receivers, they're green still. And the running backs, even though Carr is a freshman, he does not look like a freshman. Jones has been an absolute beast as well. So I would just really rely on them, and I think the run game would really open things up in the pass game, especially on play action.
This team reminds me a lot of, and this is a stretch, given the fact that I think Sam Darnold is incredibly more talented than the quarterbacks that these teams have, but the Alabama teams of 2009, 2010, where they were run first with Mark Ingram and TJ Yeldon and Derrick Henry and Trent Richardson. And the advantage I think we have that USC has over this Bama team is Sam Darnold is no ordinary quarterback. Whether or not he's going to get the numbers, he's still in what many consider to be the best quarterback and best player in all of college football. I mean, if the defense can step up, I think this is a team that has the opportunity, if the run game continues to be what it is, to make waves. But let's look ahead, Max, because a game that is 11 years in the making now is finally here. It is going to be Texas. Tom Herman and the Texas Longhorns are making their way out to the Coliseum. Tom Herman, if you look, he's 3-0 against top 5 teams in his career. You saw what he did as an offensive coordinator at Iowa State, then Ohio State, and you saw what he did 2 years at Houston, winning a Chick-fil-A Bowl against Florida State. What are your concerns when looking at Texas? They're a 1-1 team, 51 points allowed against Maryland, but again, you can never count Tom Herman out. Is there anything that you see on paper that concerns you a little bit?
Sure. So obviously Texas is their advantage is on the offensive side of the ball. The defense has definitely struggled to start off the season. And more specifically, USC has struggled against the run game, more so with Western Michigan. Stanford, they contained it pretty well after one Bryce Love long run. But Texas does have a very experienced offensive line. And while they did lose Donta Foreman, who was the college football's leading rusher last season, Chris Warren III is certainly an ample replacement. So I think Texas's run game would be one thing that concerns me against USC's defensive front. And also the fact that USC has to prepare for two quarterbacks, because Texas can easily roll out Shane Buechele, who's more of traditional pocket passer, or Sam Ehlinger, who's more of a mobile threat. So just having to prepare for two different types of quarterbacks, that always makes me a little weary, because it can be a surprise going up more against one or the other.
Absolutely. That's a team that will be well coached. They'll be well prepared. Tom Herman always does. Last question before we let you go and enjoy the rest of that Monday night football game. You gave us your concerns. What do you expect to see? What's your prediction for this 11 years in the making matchup, USC-Texas?
So I think that there's a little bit of a letdown factor here, because USC is coming off such an impressive performance against Stanford. So I actually think Texas keeps it tight in the first half before USC, the run game, Sam Darnold, and the defense step up in the second half. So I'm going to go with 42-31 Trojans.
Wow, that's a shootout. Jeff, kind of interesting you keep bringing up this game 11 years in the making, but FYI, that game was vacated, so no loss for USC against Texas in that Rose Bowl game. Thank you so much, Max, for joining us. Again, Max Meyer, homepage producer for Sports Illustrated. You are listening to In the Trenches. I am Garrett Schwartz. With me is just Jeff Dubrov. It's Monday evening. We'll be back soon.
We are back in the trenches, live from Los Angeles. You can listen at kxcsc.org or 1560 AM. That was Max Meyer and Sports Illustrated homepage producer. Always nice to have a man who knows his USC football on the show. But moving forward, we talked about Texas USC. We talked about Stanford. Talking about one player in particular now, Garrett, and it's Sam Darnold. A lot of critics out there are saying, and a lot of NFL draft experts are saying they're worried about Darnold's ball security. Through to the first 2 games of the season, he has 4 touchdowns, but 4 interceptions. You and I talked before the show. I said it doesn't worry me that much, especially when you're going to be playing teams, and I'm willing to let Darnold throw these risky passes because in the long run, when you're playing a team like Arizona or Arizona State or even I'll go with Utah or UCLA, those plays are going to find the right targets and they're going to work out in your favor. That just happened to be one of the most experienced, if not the most experienced defensive secondary he's going to face all year. I'm not worried by it. I really am not. I think you just have to live with it because he's going to deliver when he needs to.
And I agree, Jeff. And I also think personnel-wise, Darnold is really going to have to be a risk taker on this team. We look back to our first 2 years watching USC football as students, and we watched Cody Kessler, the king of the bubble screen, right? And he was really able to capitalize on Adoree Jackson, right? Juju Smith just throwing these sideline passes and watching him run it up the sideline.
He did everything by the books.
And exactly. And look, it was good enough, but at the end of the day, we weren't a great football team. Kessler was good.
Not.
He wasn't great. But, Jeff, if you look at the NFL, for example, and look, I watched the Giants last night. I watched Eli Manning not even attempt to look down the field through pretty much the entire first half, not even until the end of the fourth quarter. And look, if you look at the best quarterbacks in NFL history, I'm going to read you a list of some of the all-time NFL interception leaders. Number 1, Brett Favre. Number 2, George Blanda. I'm going to skip a few. Number 7, Johnny Unitas. Number 8, Dan Marino. Number 9, Peyton Manning. I don't know about you, but to me, it seems like throwing interceptions, that's not a bad list of names to be in. And if I'm Sam Darnold, I want to see a quarterback take risks. You have to have the ability to throw the ball downfield. Sure, 1 or 2 times a game he might make a bad decision, but sure enough, more often than not, as we've seen through the first 2 games, those big boomer bust plays, more often than not, are boom plays for Sam Darnold. So, yeah, it doesn't concern me.
I mean, it's the thing that you're going to have to live with. And this is what I said. I think I talked about it at the beginning, before week 1. What's going to make the team better in the long run, and especially the defense, is after 2 years of preparing for a team while playing Cody Kessler, and then 3 games of preparing for a team while going up against Max Brown, is you're expecting the basics. And that's what they did right. They did the absolute bare minimum of what a quarterback should do. And that's not what Sam Darnold is here to do. Sam Darnold is unpredictable, which to me makes him so dangerous, which also makes the defense so dangerous. When you're going up against a guy, like I said to Max earlier on the show, who many consider to be the best player in the country, there's no way your team cannot get better.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. So, well, for once, you and I agree on something.
Absolutely.
The interception's not a big cause for concern for this Trojans team. But we're going to transition before we have our next guest on, our token delusional Texas Longhorns fan. Robert Durbin is going to be calling in about 10 minutes. But so, Jeff, we let Max talk about USC Texas. Let's take a turn at it. A little bit of background in the game, like Jeff said, 11 years in the making, including USC's brutal Rose Bowl loss to Texas, Pete Carroll's last championship appearance, that Vince Young-led team taking down the powerhouse of Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush,
Lendale
White,
Dwayne Jarrett.
Yes. And funny enough, actually, that game was vacated. USC made a point to announce that today. So USC officially 4-0 all-time versus Texas and undefeated in the 2005 season. But yes, unranked Texas coming to the Coliseum for the first time since that title game. Jeff?
Well, they were in the Rose Bowl for that game.
Correct. No, but
the game was in the Rose Bowl, not the Coliseum.
My mistake. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
So I said it to Max. The one thing that concerns me when looking at the University of Texas at their coaching staff, you have a defensive coordinator in Todd Orlando who's not working with much. Malik Jefferson, their all-star, 5-star recruit linebacker, he's been a bust. Their front seven is pretty miserable. You look at their loss to Maryland, they lost 51-41 at home. Maryland put 472 yards of total offense with a true freshman playing quarterback. They put 263 on the ground. That's a team that's not nearly as talented in any of their skill position players as the Trojans. The thing, again, the matchup to watch for me, because you're not going to get beat by Bouchel on the ground. You might get beat through the air. He has a nice cannon. You're not going to get beat on the ground or in any way by Sam Ehlinger if he's the quarterback. He's a true freshman from Austin Westlake. The one matchup to watch is Colin Johnson versus Iman Marshall. Colin Johnson's a 6'6 sophomore wide receiver, 220 pounds. He is their go-to. He is their go-to receiver. I mean, when you're 6'6", it's hard not to be. I personally think, however, Texas is going to have a hard time stopping the run. Giving up 263 to Maryland with the athletes that they have compared to Ronald Jones and Stephen Carr. My dad talked to me the other night after the Stanford game. He said, and I quote, "You're going to need oxygen tanks on the sideline for how much you're going to run up and down us." I mean, I don't know if you want a prediction yet, but I'd say look out. I think the USC run game, is going to have an absolute field day. Look for Sam Darnold, a childhood USC fan. You know he was crying at Vince Young's touchdown to come out with a full-on boulder just as a fan on his shoulder. I think USC gets the job done in emphatic fashion. I'll give my prediction now, 49-14. I think USC puts up close to 400 yards on the ground on Saturday.
So I'm going to side with you, Jeff. I think USC is going to cover their 17-point favorite, right? I think they're going to beat Texas pretty handedly.
Move down to 15 just now.
For the main reason that Texas is such a one-dimensional offense, relying so much, and you talked about your key matchup. For me, it's running back Chris Warren for the Longhorns and their offensive line. And you saw it between Game 1 and Game 2 versus the Trojans. When you're not able to defend the run like they were in that first half against Western Michigan, it spells out problems for the Trojans. Week 2 against Stanford with Bryce Love, a little bit of a different story, limiting Bryce Love to only 25 rushing yards in the second half. I think the front seven for USC has some momentum going. I think you talked about it with Max, how Clay and Pendergrass are starting to transition different players in the rotation. We see Marlon Tuipulotu getting a few more possessions. Just really, really great. But look, I want to propose another theory. And the only scenario where I think USC might not perform as well. Two reasons. Number one, as you may recall, last season, USC got off to a little bit of a slow start. Clay Helton in his inaugural season with the Trojans coming out really, really flat against Alabama. They make a quarterback change in Week 3, and come Week 4, USC's a Rose Bowl winning team. Let's give Tom Herman a little bit of time to get this team going. And look, it's now Week 3, right? They're coming off a big win against, I know it's San Jose State, but still
San Jose State
56 points.
San Jose State, by the way, was beating USF South Florida 16-0. They played that team very well. That's not a cupcake team.
My point being, Tom Herman now has had a few weeks to establish himself, establish his system, and now they're playing essentially probably for their season. Scenario number 2, USC coming off a Rose Bowl win came out flat against Western Michigan. So, in Clay Helton's tenure, you can make the argument that when we start to praise USC gets a little comfortable. They don't play their best football. Week 2 against Stanford, after a lackluster performance against Western Michigan, the critics coming out saying USC's not a playoff team, Sam Darnold's not a Heisman-winning quarterback, yada, 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 and you saw what happened against Stanford. So, look, will USC come out a little bit flat after, taking down Stanford pretty handedly? I don't think so, but could it happen? Maybe.
Here's my thing when it comes down to all of this, Garrett. This is Texas. This is a game that Fox, when they released their preview for the game, talked about. It showed Vince Young over and over and over again. The amount of players on that team who might have grown up as USC fans watching Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and the almighty dynasty get taken down, they have a bad taste in their mouth. This is not Western Michigan. This is the University of Texas. This is still, despite the struggles in the past 5 to 6, 7 years, it's still one of the more marquee programs in the country. I don't care what you say. This team will come out fired up. They will come out ready to play, and you know Clay Helton has that team ready. And you heard Sam Darnold say it to Shelley Smith in his post-game interview. If we get lackadaisical and we get comfortable, we will lose. But we can only find out on Saturday. When we return, we're going to take a quick break. Robert Durbin, token delusional Texas friend and fan, on the phone when we return. He's got some insight on the game. He's going to be here. We have that and some more when we return on In the Trenches on KXSE.org.
All right, we are back. This is In the Trenches. I'm Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeffrey Dubrov. Some Monday Night Football going on right now, but we're talking about college football, and we have, once again, a returning guest, Robert Durbin. You officially have a title on our show, the Delusional Texas Longhorn Token Fan. Robert, welcome.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the title.
So I'm going to start this one off, and, man, I've just been dying to ask this one to you ever since that week one loss against Maryland. But you came in our show about 6 weeks ago, and, man, you came out guns a-blazing. Tom Herman taking over the program, and Robert Durbin, Delusional Texas Fan's bold prediction, the Longhorns will finish 11-1 on the season. So, Robert, please enlighten me. How will your Texas Longhorns defeat the number 4 ranked USC Trojans this week to maintain that 11-1 finish that you so boldly predicted 6 weeks ago?
How will we do it? Well, it's probably going to take a perfect game. Clearly the first 2 weeks have been a very humbling experience, and it's unfortunate because we have talent off the wazoo at just about every position on the team, but unfortunately I think these guys have just been undercoached and inconsistently coached for so long that, quite frankly, they don't know how to win. How are we going to win? Well, it's going to take a lot. And I think the biggest thing that we have going for us is the potential. I mean, look, it's just you guys are loaded. I mean, sitting in my room on Saturday night,
we appreciate that.
Just completely running through Stanford. I mean, it was extremely – I mean, you guys probably have 5 offensive linemen that are going to the NFL. Obviously, Sam Darnold is probably the best quarterback in college football, probably going to be the number 1 draft pick. I mean, clearly there is a talent mismatch. But, we're 17-point underdogs. The reason why we hired Tom Herman to come to Texas is his record against top 25 teams. How the Horns are going to come out and play, you don't know what he's going to say. You don't know how much effect that's going to do. That's something you can't really quantify. I guess for Texas, what you got to hope for is for USC to get sluggish. I mean, you guys are y'all are probably you're pretty damn near close to being the Golden Boys in college football again. And people have been hyping you up all week. So maybe, USC starts off a little sluggish. One thing I do know is Darnold he struggled with interceptions. And the one highlight I think I can take away from Texas is we scored 4 non-offensive touchdowns in 2 games. So there's playmakers on the field that if for some reason a tip ball, bad decision, you get interception, you get it back for a touchdown, maybe it keeps us in the game. I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic as I can because I'm flying all the way up there, and I'm hoping that we're not down 42-0 at halftime. But
were those tickets refundable?
No. Well, I don't think so, but they weren't that expensive, so I don't think it'll be a good time to go out and spend some time in sunny California. If we're going to have a chance, we're going to have to stop the run. It's all about the run. We're going to have to run the ball and stop the run.
And yeah, Robert, you and I were. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Robert, you and I were talking on Sunday, like we always do, and you said your concerns were with the front 7, your defensive front not as talented as you would like. Who's a player on the team though that as USC football analysts we're not expecting? Who's going to be the playmaker on this team? Because I said that the key to watch for me is cornerback Iman Marshall versus Colin Johnson. Who do you, as a guy that you're going to want, that USC should keep an eye on for the Longhorns?
So there's two. Actually, there's I'd say there's two guys specifically offensively, and they're both receivers. One of them is they're actually both redshirt freshmen. One of them is Reggie Hickhill-Maps. He's number 17, and he had an incredible game against Maryland. I think he was a little banged up against San Jose State, but he's a very, very sneaky, fast guy. I mean, you can run crossing routes, drag routes with him. You get him in open space. He ran a punt back against Maryland. He returns kicks. He's a real explosive guy that he can score. The other one is little Jordan Humphrey, who's just a freak from South Lake Carroll. And Texas, Tim Beck, our offensive coordinator, he likes to bring a lot of different formation sets. So sometimes we have 2 backs, 1 back, 3 backs even, and we have a lot of guys in motion. And the idea behind that is you're trying to confuse them. We had a lot of success against San Jose State, and quite frankly, we had success against Maryland. But this is USC. It's a different story. And unfortunately for us, our offensive line play has been somewhat subpar. And we have 2 guys on there, Patrick Vahe and Connor Williams, who are probably going to play in the pros. Connor Williams is probably going to be a first-round draft pick.
Connor Williams, I'd say, is the best offensive lineman in the country.
And you can make up for subpar offensive line play in some ways with schematic diversity, bringing guys in motion, shifting it around, trying to confuse you. But how much that's going to do, I don't really know.
All right, so Robert, Jeffrey and I obviously have been giving you a little bit of a hard time on the show so far, and we're kind of hoping that this USC team isn't as arrogant as Jeff and I are on the air. But it wasn't too long ago when Jeff and I were just talking about this that last season Clay Helton, in his first full season as USC head coach, came out with the Trojans. They come out against Alabama week 1 and get steamrolled 52-6. You know what happens at the end of the season? They end up turning their season around, winning 9 games in a row, winning the Rose Bowl. I'm looking at Texas, and I'm looking at Tom Herman, and I'm thinking to myself, how is Tom Herman going to turn this season around? And a part of me wants to say, look, this is a charismatic guy. He's a guy who figured it out at Houston. He's going to figure it out at Texas. But I'm looking at the schedule for the Longhorns, and your next 5 games are at USC, at Iowa State, and then 3 home games, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State. Like, wow. Do you think, is there any way the Longhorns turn this season around? Or is it a real possibility you guys are just a sub-500 football team in year 1 for Tom Herman?
Look, I as an optimist, I want to believe it. It's college football. It's the way to play the games. But being realistic, just kind of the product I've seen on the field, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, you watch what some people will say Ohio State's not that great, but when you watch what Oklahoma did, they went into the horseshoe and just absolutely played a phenomenal game against Ohio State. Oklahoma State is incredibly good. Kansas State's always good. I don't know, guys. We've got ourselves a quarterback controversy in some ways. I think you're going to see a true freshman starting in his first true road game in the Coliseum against the number 4 team in the country on Saturday night. That's going to cause some issues. I don't know. If this team can get it together, and, they talk about their pride and their attitude, but I will say this, the Maryland game was just awful. That was just, it was bad. San Jose State came out, and we beat the team the way we were supposed to beat, and that's a positive.
A new coach in a new program, it just takes time to figure things out.
Yeah, but the problem is at Texas, it's not. That's the mentality is you got to.
But it's not that way at USC either. It's just, again, things take time.
I mean, look at Herman's recruiting classes. Already Herman's recruiting classes, he's just recruiting the state of Texas dry.
Yeah, it's true, but you got to keep those classes. Verbal commitments are verbal commitments, and if the Horns go with 4-8 this year, I think you could probably see some of those guys maybe decommitting or something else. But a lot of Texas fans look at someone like Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, their success in their first year, and just it was just very disappointing to see the team come out and play like they did against Maryland. Last week it was a little bit better, but, I was sitting next to my dad, and probably 4 or 5 times he kind of leaned over to me and says, USC probably scores a touchdown there. And so, even though we won 56-0, it was not anywhere near the performance that would be needed to beat USC.
Let's not forget when Jim Harbaugh took Michigan over, that's still a team that was 4 years fresh off of a BCS Bowl. But last question, Robert, before we let you go. We know it's late in Austin. Last time we talked about who we each thought was the best conference in football. And I'm looking at the top 25, and the Pac-12 has 5 teams in there. They have USC at 4, Washington at 6, Stanford at 19, Washington State at 21, UCLA at 25, and Utah with the most votes on the outside of the top 25. I'm not saying that the Pac-12 is the premier conference in football, although I think they're getting there. Do you still think that when you said it, the ACC or the Big Ten is still your best conference in football?
Just that number alone is for the Pac-12 is a very convincing argument. I think it's still early in the season. You got to see this stuff. Most importantly, USC is the premier team in the conference right now. What you want best and what I guess you guys expect is USC needs to come out and win 42-7, 42-10. Just absolutely put Texas away by halftime. But, as far as how the conferences are going to go, I don't really know. I don't know if it really matters. I think it comes and goes each year. You could probably, there's some good teams in the ACC as always. Clemson, Florida State. Those guys are going to be good. Obviously, with Florida State losing Francois, it's a different story. But yeah, I mean that number, that AP poll number for the Pac-12 it's pretty eye-opening. Obviously, I just think it's too early to tell. Truthfully, that's my, I guess, final verdict on it.
All right, Robert, we got one more question for you. Thanks so much once again for joining us. We really appreciate your chutzpah and coming on our show today. So final predictions for USC and Texas this Saturday. Let's hear it.
Okay. So I'm thinking we're going to come out, Horns are going to play aggressive. We're going to have a great scheme. The team's going to be fired up to play. We're 17-point underdogs. Last time these two teams got together, greatest college football game. Texas has that mentality. We're still Texas. I think the Horns come out, play great defensively, force a couple turnovers, get a couple defensive touchdowns. Chris Warren runs ramp shot.
Oh God!
And we get Gerard Hurd into the Wildcat package. We get Sam Ellinger into the Wildcat package. I think that the Horns pull it out 38-35 in a thriller, and it's gonna go down as one of the best college football games all year.
Interesting to hear, but remember, we have a bet to be made, and a bet was made 6 weeks ago. I have a feeling I'll be seeing Robert Durbin wearing some Cardinal and gold throughout the Austin UT campus. Robert, thank you again for joining us as always.
Appreciate it, guys.
Of course. When we return, NFL rookies shining all over the place, shining like diamonds. Tom Brady, and some NFL picks when we return. You're listening to In the Trenches on KXSC.org.
Welcome back. You are listening to In the Trenches. I am Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeff Dubrov. Robert Durbin just joined us once again with some extremely bold takes on this Texas Longhorns football team, predicting a bold upset for the Longhorns over the Trojans. But Jeff and I are now going to transition to the National Football League. One game still going on from Week 1, Denver against... Who are they playing again?
The new Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, we'll get a score update on that pretty soon. But we want to talk about the Thursday night game from last week, because I was pretty shocked. I know Jeffrey was shocked. Neither of us had Kansas City winning that game, but wow. First half, definitely a close one, but a pretty one-sided game in the second half. And of course, in typical NFL, sports media, Twitter, U-verse fashion,
Tom Brady's done. He's too old, Garrett. He's done.
Everyone overreacted, right? Tom Brady, 40 years old. He's done. The New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, they've been figured out.
Give me a break.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeffrey. Look, it's week 1. 2014, the New England Patriots, week 2, week 1 against the Kansas City Chiefs, losing that game, and we heard the same stuff. The New England Patriots have finally been figured out. Tom Brady, it's time for him to retire. But no, I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, look.
You hear this all the time with greatness.
It wasn't a good performance, but my takeaway from that game, Jeff, is how about the Kansas City Chiefs? I don't think people are giving that team nearly enough credit. I mean, the defense completely locked down the Patriots in the second half. I mean, they had no answers whatsoever. Tom Brady looked absolutely confused. And then offensively is really what surprised me.
Alex Smith was phenomenal. Kareem Hunt looks like a guy who's been in the league for 5 years and an absolute animal breaking through tackles on offense. And some of the offensive weapons in terms of receiving, Tyreek Hill, yards receiving. Travis Kelce looked good. I mean, I was impressed by Kansas City, but again, don't overreact. Kansas City, Andy Reid, head coach, might come out and they might fall next week. But, I mean, I don't think I've agreed with you more on anything of this overreaction to Tom Brady.
It's a very amicable show.
I mean, folks,
you and I agreeing a lot today.
This is the same quarterback that less than 8 months ago brought his team back from a 28-3 deficit on the biggest stage in the sport and won the Super Bowl, and then works out all offseason. You don't just lose these types of things overnight. You might see a drop-off statistically gradually this season. Oh, he didn't throw for as many yards or anything or his passer rating dropped. It doesn't happen over one night.
Now, I'm going to push back just a little bit, and here's why. The Patriots' record at home, when leading by 10 or more points before this game, 102-1. So
I thought they had never lost a game in the Tom Brady.
It was 102-1. Wow. So this being the second game, but here's the other thing. Tom Brady is now 40 years old, and I'm going to compare him to Peyton Manning. A guy, and I know Peyton was coming off neck surgery, but nonetheless, a guy who really just fell off a cliff in terms of production and efficiency. I'm not saying it's going to happen to Tom Brady, but what I am saying is 40's a real number.
Oh,
age really does creep up on
40's that barrier, but here's my response to that. Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl in his final season. I know you can credit that to the defense of Denver, but I still think, Tom Brady has been fortunate enough to where his injuries throughout his career have not been as serious as the one that Peyton Manning suffered. I'm not concerned.
Hey, Giselle said he got a concussion last season. But here's the other thing, Jeff.
Instigated an NFL
Tom Brady, while he did win a Super Bowl last season, there were times where he really did not look good in the playoffs. Week 1, New England really, really struggled. And in the Super Bowl, through 3 quarters, Tom Brady was awful. So, look, I'm not saying he's going to drop off, but what I am saying is we have seen serious signs of slowing down. And look, here's what I will say. I don't think Tom Brady's finished. I think he's going to have a good season. Will he have one of his best seasons? I don't necessarily think so. But the big problem for the Patriots is their defense. Their linebackers are atrocious. They had some key injuries. They lost Dante Hightower last week. I'm sure he'll be back soon. They lost their first-round draft pick. He was a linebacker. If the Patriots can't figure out their front seven, and you combine that with an aging, no argument, he's aging and a production declining Tom Brady, the Patriots might really have a problem. But let's transition. And, Jeff, this was a segment I know you really wanted to talk about. We talked about New England, Kansas City, and there was one rookie in that game who just really stood out, Kareem Hunt. Wow. So, Jeff, I want to hear what rookies really stood out to you from Week 1 in the NFL. Who should we keep an eye on as the season progresses?
I was really impressed by DeShone Kizer. In a close loss against the Steelers, he went 20 of 30, 222 yards, a touchdown and interception, a game they only lost by 3 points, and they couldn't run the ball. I think DeShone Kizer, it's early, obviously, but I was always impressed by him at Notre Dame. He had an impressive debut against a Pittsburgh defense that some consider to be the best in the league. I was really impressed by DeShone Kizer.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other group that really stood out for me is, and there's been a lot of hype about them heading into the season, just the rookie running back class in general.
Dalvin Cook was
great. We talked about Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette was great for Jacksonville. Did you foresee that one? Jacksonville demolishing Houston. Houston completely incompetent in offense despite putting in Deshaun Watson for that second half.
Bill O'Brien's seat is on fire right now.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, it's time for our NFL picks of the week. Last week, Jeffrey and I picked every single game, and I regret to inform our audience that Jeff actually edged me in week 1.
What else is new?
8-7, but we're going to change it up this week. We're going to spare you picking every single game this week. Instead, here's how we're going to do it. We are going to each pick one lock, one game for one team that will absolutely not lose this week. We're then going to pick one upset, an underdog who shouldn't win, but heck, we think they're going to. And finally, a game that's going to be closer than expected. So a team that's coming in as an underdog, a big-time underdog, but isn't quite going to pull out the upset. Jeff, let's hear your lock for 1 point. And if you get it wrong, it's -1. So Jeff's lock of the week.
I like that rule system. I mean, you gave me some grief for this one, but I mean, the definition of a lock is a lock. I mean, it's the team that's going to win no matter what. I mean, it's the team that I have full confidence in. It's the Raiders over the New York Jets. The Raiders.
Yeah, congratulations picking against the Jets. My grandmother could do that. Look, I'm going to take the Patriots in a bounce-back performance against the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, obviously, an abominable defense. You saw it against Minnesota tonight. But look, New England and Bill Belichick have 9 days to prepare against these New Orleans Saints. And the Saints coming off a short week's rest playing Monday Night Football. I'm taking New England.
And how about Sam Bradford torching them? Garrett, you're upset.
My upset, I'm picking the L.A. Rams over the Redskins. Both teams in Los Angeles. I'm excluding UCLA. Once again winning. Look, the Redskins last week, Captain Kirk just not quite good enough. And, man, I was really impressed by that Rams pass rush. I think they'd be causing all kinds of problems for Kirk Cousins. I like L.A.
You took the words out of my mouth when it comes to you like that Kirk Cousins. I'm taking Jacksonville over Tennessee. I know Jacksonville's at home. Although, I mean, the offense still struggles. That Jacksonville defense, they finally have all those picks healthy. I mean, Jalen Ramsey, Flowers, those guys are aggressive. They're big. And then finally, I think the closer than expected game.
Closer than expected, and I think, once again, man, a really, really amicable show on In the Trenches tonight. Jeffrey and I agreeing on this one, both taking the Browns in a closer than expected game, not quite edging out the Ravens, who looked really darn impressive against the Bengals, or maybe the Bengals just looked really darn bad. But, you mentioned it earlier, Deshaun Kaiser, the best quarterback that we've probably seen for the Browns in a long, long time.
Yeah.
That is all the time that we have on In the Trenches this week.
Garrett, I want to say one thing before we go. First off,
I didn't make my pick, by the way, so I'd like to get that in before we leave.
What, for the game?
Yes.
For the Texas game?
Yes.
Oh, let's send it in right now.
Okay. Did you give your score, by the way?
49-14 USC.
All right, so I'm also pretty optimistic, not as optimistic as Jeffrey. I think we cover. I'm saying 42-21. Still a spanking.
Right, that's spanking. Once again, though, really quickly before I let you sign off, a shout-out to the Cleveland Indians. They won their 19th straight game. And on the other side of the spectrum, the Dodgers are on a 10-game losing streak. The yearly meltdown begins, and our thoughts go out to the city of New York. It has been 16 years to the day. Our thoughts and prayers are with them. As always, Garrett, send it home.
Thank you for tuning into the Trenches. We'd like to thank our guests, Max Meyer from Sports Illustrated, Robert Durbin, our delusional Texas Longhorns fan. So this is a fun one, Jeff. Thanks for tuning in. This is In the Trenches. You're listening to KXSC Los Angeles, online at kxsc.org or on the airwaves at 1560 AM. I'm Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeff Dubrov. We'll see you next Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific.